Enneagram 1 is stereotypically known as the rigid, overly moral, goody two-shoes type. Whilst this can be true for some Enneagram 1s, there's much more to their character than this. Enneagram 1s are usually mistaken for Enneagram 3s, 5s, 7s, and 8s. However, what differentiates them is their passion for anger, fixation of perfectionism, and defense mechanism of reaction formation. The Enneagram 1 is gut triad, meaning that they will overindulge in sensory environments to cope with the negative emotions that they have, like the Enneagram 9 and Enneagram 8. But what does that mean? For Enneagram 1s, it means they have a tendency to restrain their resentment and redirect it into hard work and discipline through perfectionism. They're overly concerned with action to cope with negative feelings, instead of pondering and analyzing emotions and environments like the head triad, and redirecting emotions outwardly into an image like what the heart triad does.
Anyway, I don't really care what anybody writes about me. But my girls, it's just so unfair to the girls. Anyway, point is, the point is we really need to figure out where to place Donatella because she's barely speaking to anyone.
I'm so sorry, Miranda. If you want me to cancel your evening, I can.
Don't be ridiculous. Why would we do that?
Is there anything else I can do?
Your job.
The Enneagram 1's need for reformatory standards and anger stems from a need for a perfect environment. Their passion of anger causes them to become judgmental, critical, and consistently frustrated with others, themselves, and their surroundings for not fitting their standards. Oscar Chazo describes anger as a standing against reality. Their anger is not emotional like the sexual 4, for example, though, but rather linked to mental elaborations and an internal need to change situations they're in. They resent imperfections around them, they resent failure and reality, making them demanding, vindictive, and inhibited at their most unhealthy.
Did you fall down and smack your little head on the pavement?
The fixation of perfectionism or resentment is linked to this passion of anger that they have. Because of this overwhelming frustration with reality, they pursue mastery, strive to better themselves or others, which in turn creates a moralistic attitude. Perfectionism makes them quite disciplined, logical, and they will usually postpone pleasure, although the sexual one may be more pleasure-oriented than the other subtypes. Perfectionism creates this conflict and imbalance between work and play, duty and pleasure. Their stinginess and need for control can appear similar to Enneagram 5's stinginess and Enneagram 6's concern with security in their environment, but the Enneagram 1 is more concerned with being incorrect. As mentioned before, Enneagram 1s are very emotionally controlled. Their anger is not emotional or neurotic. This aligns with the defense mechanism of reaction formation, which is reacting in the opposite way of unwanted negative emotions. This can be expressed through resentment, frustration, and disdain for imperfection. Basically what this means is Enneagram 1s believe that their negative emotions and impulses should be repressed, and so they display inhibition and control over their impulses. Enneagram 1s actually have a strong connection to Enneagram 7 in this way, and that Enneagram 7s represent a self-indulgent, impulsive side of the Enneagram 1s that they must repress. They may criticize others for emotional expression as a way of projecting their own avoidance of emotions and impulses that are considered wrong or inappropriate. Overall, they're critical, resentful, emotionally controlled, and ascetic individuals at their core, and these traits vary from subtype to subtype. However, it is important to note that Enneagram 1s follow their own standards of what is considered right and wrong. This can seem kind of like the Enneagram 8, but the Enneagram 8 doesn't care for perfectionism or correcting their environment or others. They care more about justice in regards to lust, pleasure, impulses, and desires. Enneagram 1s don't necessarily have to adhere to social norms, but they do have a tendency to implement rules, impose their logic and standards against themselves and others, which the Enneagram 8 could care less about. Healthier Enneagram 1s can easily be more free-willed, fun-loving, and charismatic, though.
My name is Miguel O'Hara. I'm this dimension's one and only Spider-Man. At least I was. But I'm not like the others. I don't always like what I have to do. But I know I have to be the one to do it.
When the passion of anger is combined with the one-on-one sexual instinct, it produces a character who expresses and projects criticism the most. The sexual one is the only Enneagram 1 subtype that feels the most comfortable with anger, as the other two are characterized as being much colder. The sexual one has the most access to anger and redirects this into the environment relentlessly. Sexual ones are reformers, wanting to perfect the environments and those around them before themselves. They are the most fiery, charismatic, dynamic, and pleasure-oriented Enneagram 1 by Enneagram 1 standards. This is different from the Enneagram 8 or any pleasure-oriented type, as they're still strongly disciplined, perfectionistic, lack serenity, and are controlled. They appear virtuous and authoritative-like, not necessarily rebellious. This has given them the label Zeal or vehemence. The sexual one is driven by a need to reform the environment without having much care for how others see them and can come off very territorial. The one-on-one sexual instinct is exhibited through the fixation of perfectionism. This need to perfect their partners in close relations, to transform and correct them, which can come off as domineering and extremely similar to the sexual 8. However, you must remember that sexual 8s are lustful and oriented by pleasure, rebelliousness, and discipline, compared to the sexual 1, not by perfectionism and frustration with standards. The sexual one's focus on one-on-one connections, therefore, causes them to idealize a partner and associate them with high expectations, but they often become frustrated due to the reality of imperfection in others. They essentially moralize intimacy, but they're still very emotionally vigilant and attentive to the needs of others and are highly justice-seeking when healthy.
You miscalculated. I love Zuko more than I fear you.
No, you miscalculated! You should have feared me more!
All your life, you've used fear to control people, like your friends May and Ty Lee.
Well, what choice do I have? Trust is for fools. Fear is the only reliable way.
Perfectionism extends to this constant compulsion to perfect and improve themselves. This excessive desire for improvement stems from a neurotic need, one that makes them feel their efforts are worthwhile. Everything can be improved. I know how to improve it. Their attentiveness ensures they can strengthen themselves and the bonds they hold, always acting on the urge to tidy up and solve problems. What comes with this is a denial of one's own needs. While social ones may front a perfect image with rigidity, high morality, and intellectualism, and self-preservation ones is the most self-critical and self-perfectionistic, sexual one cares less for presenting themselves as the perfect role model. The sexual one's one-on-one instinct makes them most concerned with the maintenance of closer unions rather than appealing to the masses or for self-preservation security. Sexual ones do seek validation for their efforts, but it is still quite antisocial and uncomfortable with being part of a collective.
Who's worried about Spot? I'll worry about Spot.
What did I do? Ask me not to save my father.
I'm not asking.
Miguel, just give him the center.
Great look.
Sexual ones are highly strong-willed, confident people. They know exactly what they want and how to get what they want. But despite being confident and strong-willed individuals, they downplay their emotions and disregard them as obstacles, demonstrating the defense mechanism of reaction formation. Sexual one falls deep into action, discipline, and control to maintain the perfectionism they seek to hide their vulnerabilities from. This stems from a resentment of imperfection, fear of seeing part of themselves that falls short and fail. They desire a connection who they can perfect and control at their unhealthiest, but also one that they can loosen up with. They therefore can be quite jealous, possessive, but immensely loyal.
My own mother thought I was a monster. She was right, of course, but it still hurt.
You break enough cannon, save enough captains, and we could lose everything.
Send me home.
I can't do that. Not now.
What am I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Sexual ones tend to be dualistic in a sense. They maintain restraint and control, yet confront situations with passion and drive. The sexual ones have a deep-seated relationship with control and dominance, often described as tough-loving parental figures. Their shame and guilt lies most significantly with their impulsive desires, the side of them that they cannot submit to. There is conflict between maintaining moralistic standards and reconciling with one's instinctive desires. When healthy, sexual ones are energetic, effusive characters that make amazing leaders. They're encouraged to feel less of a need to be so controlling and focus on indulging more in the pleasures of life appropriately.
Police Constable Nicholas Angel, born and schooled in London, graduated Canterbury University in 1993 with a double first in politics and sociology, attended Hendon College of Police Training, displayed great aptitude in field exercises. In the last 12 months has received 9 special commendations, achieved the highest arrest record for any officer in the Met, and sustained 3 injuries in the line of duty.
When the passion of anger is met with the social instinct, it produces a character who is colder and ironically non-adaptable. The social instinct is also known as the adaptation or intellectual sphere, and so the social instinct makes the social one develop a critical understanding of the world around them, which consequently makes them struggle in adapting to the social norms and customs of behavior they feel are unacceptable. This is because social ones have their own perfectionistic standards and ideals of how the masses should behave, believing their stance is superior to those of the public. This is what gives them the label inadaptability or superiority. Perfectionism, therefore, is directed towards the social sphere and upholding a perfect role model image. Social ones assert their anger from a place of high moral standing and intellectualism as a weapon, making them colder than the fiery sexual one. Achazo described the social one as individuals who are more rigid rather than a need for passion. They're quite aristocratic. The fixation of perfectionism, therefore, has rigid ideas of how others should behave, and they will impose what they think should be happening according to their standards, as they fear themselves and others acting wrongly or inappropriately. Essentially, it stems from a need for social belonging that they deeply deny. They feel inadequate and thus must make a stance in the world. They struggle to feel social, but still do not care much for what others think. So, rather than being perfectionistic, they appear perfect from an outside perspective. This is not the same as Enneagram 3, Social 5, or Social 7. Social ones still rely on turning to action and the sensory environment to cope with negative feelings as a gut triad type. They do not rely on their perfect image for validation or turn emotionality outwards like the heart triad Enneagram 3. And they don't ponder or overanalyze their environment and emotions like the head triad types. Social 7 and Social 1 do seem drastically similar here, but the Social 7 experiences guilt to a deeper degree and indulges more in intellectual and mental gluttony, compared to the Social 1 who is overly disciplined. Essentially, the Social 7 is more indisciplined. The Social 1 focuses on the right way to be, displaying themselves as owners of truth, appearing cold and composed. Social ones consider themselves to be perfect, and so are less concerned than the other 2 subtypes with being internally anxious about perfectionism. They need to represent themselves as the perfect model of these moralistic standards, like a school teacher, which is defined by their trait of overcoming laziness, anger, and spontaneity through idealization of a perfect reality according to their standards. They resent themselves and others when this is not maintained.
What do we reckon? Angel.
Huh?
Help me.
Okay, we get a proper cordon up, we let the fire crews finish their stuff, and then we get forensics in to do a thorough sweep of the house.
Very good. What he said.
They consistently improve themselves and others like the other subtypes, correlating to the defense mechanism of reaction formation. Distancing themselves from emotions and others is a function to maintain superiority over others. Rather than turning impulsive anger ruthlessly and vehemently, like the sexual one, they will regulate themselves and express frustration and rage coldly, not explosively. Negative emotions, frustration, and inappropriate desires are always turned to standing above on a moral pedestal. So, the social one is cold, rigid, moralistically and intellectually omnipotent, who expects others to adhere to their perfect standards. But when healthy, they are reasonable, principled, fair, and compassionate. They're encouraged to let loose and not feel that reality is okay when things are not according to their standards. When the passion of anger meets the self-preservation instinct, we are introduced to a character who turns their anger against themselves into an excessive need to be perfect to ensure security and safety in the world. Their frustrations and dissatisfaction with imperfections is self-internalized, which makes them obsessive, detail-oriented, and anxious individuals, hence the nickname worry. They stand strongly with their morals, are highly responsible and hardworking to fulfill their neurotic need to restrain impulses, desires, and emotions. Anger is denied the most in the self-preservation one, unlike the sexual one.
Is she alright? I guess.
She's bleeding. She needs a doctor.
The self-preservation one believes that they are unable to meet their own standards, which causes fearful anticipation when their security is threatened. They feel they're unworthy and too imperfect to survive, and compensate through the excessive fixation of perfectionism. They are self-critical, ascetic, and moderate, and will always maintain politeness and warmth as this is the perfect way to be, to seek approval for their good child image. They therefore need to control everything around them, micromanaging things, and therefore resent themselves. So they control their anger and repress it behind a mask of warmth and helpfulness. This ensures they are consistently improving and correcting themselves accordingly. They demand a lot from themselves.
Did you ever think of just doing it the easy way?
No. I knew who I wanted to be. I wanted to help people. It brings me happiness, even if I am damned regardless.
Damned.
Enough. Remember who you are.
Bella, you're okay.
Bella needs you.
This sounds a lot like the self-preservation 6, social 6, self-preservation 4, or even social 2 and social 9 to an extent. However, Enneagram 6s and self-preservation 4s are not motivated by anger or resentment. Enneagram 6s are solely based upon fear of the external world and needing security through data and information in the environment. Self-preservation 1s are not fearful necessarily in the same way that Enneagram 6s are, but are much more oriented obsessively towards their own behavior, their own perfectionistic standards and morals, and ensuring they remain disciplined and composed. Self-preservation 4s are entirely motivated by a deep emotional melancholy and envy that self-preservation 1s don't always experience due to the repression and restraint against emotions and reaction formation. The self-preservation 1 still has the confidence to implement their own standards externally and internally, and they understand what is righteous and appropriate, unlike the Enneagram 6s and self-preservation 4s.
Do you ever say thank you?
He's gonna know we're here now.
Whose fault is that? I'm an excellent shot.
Self-preservation 1s have an excessive disposition to obedience and therefore become highly efficient, disciplined, and ascetic, much like the other Enneagram 1 subtypes, but do not necessarily need others. They're quite self-autonomous and independent. Self-sufficiency is not asking for help, letting everything depend on me. It's hard for me to ask. I don't count on others. Maintaining their composure and perfect image is what protects them from anything that can threaten their self-preservative needs and self-autonomy, which transitions into the defense mechanism of reaction formation. Much like the other Enneagram 1 subtypes, self-preservation 1s fall deeply into turning their pleasurable desires and negative emotions into more appropriate responses through discipline, moderation, and composure. Self-preservation ones are frustrated with themselves, but will always hold on to a cold demeanor. They're unlike the sexual one in ruthlessness and dominating anger, and unlike the social one in needing to perfect themselves as role models and for the masses. Self-preservation ones are simply concerned with themselves first and foremost.
Thank you.
You're missing out.
Are you going to question him?
About what? And me? Definitely not above board.
Silco, his connections. Isn't that why we're here?
We're here because I'm hungry. Do you know what prison food is like? No, of course you don't.
Unbelievable. I didn't break you out of jail to eat slop.
Oil and water, that's all there is.
What about us?
Oil and water. Was it meant to be?
The self-preservation one is overly masochistic, obsessing over their own orderliness and actions, but nevertheless are highly hardworking and serviceable individuals. They focus on their own self-preservative needs immensely and are encouraged to take time to loosen up and be okay with imperfections and mistakes within themselves. They should acknowledge it's okay to be human, imperfect, and realistic.